Allie's very outspoken, and I love it. I love the fact that she speaks her truth. And we will definitely try to talk a bit about diversity, equity, inclusion today, and I'll welcome your thoughts there as well, Allie, in that. So usual housekeeping, just to number one, this is a monthly Ask Me Anything. It's almost like an Ask We Anything. I've been trying to, bring collective knowledge in. So next month's guest will be Ava Sadeghi. Ava is co-founder and CEO of Simba, which is essentially a student internship, experiential matchmaking platform. And she is also a U of A alum. And in fact, it was her experience as a student at U of A that really launched the idea of what became Simba. So, and the timing of that will be right after finals are done for all of the students. So it'll be like this perfect, okay, I'm done with that. I'm thinking about the summer. Great, let me introduce you to someone who's been exactly where you are and is trying to help students find, companies and students find a better fit. Lastly, you're all already so good. Everybody's so well adjusted to Zoom these days and coming in and muting. I don't even have to say that. I would ask, at least in the early going, if something comes up and you're really dying to know, feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, just ask questions via the chat. And I will make a point of trying to, wrap up the things I want to know about Allie by midway through this hour so that we've got time for all of you to bring questions in. So with that, I'd like to welcome Allie Burns. Are you in DC today, Allie, or near DC?
I am in
awesome.
DC. Yep.
And I'm not going to go through the bio that was sent out to everybody because I actually want to ask you in your own words to talk a little bit about, I guess, your experience, how, what because I know you went to Thunderbird for the international business, which is it's an awesome program. I'm disappointed that ASU runs it. No, I'm kidding. I don't have those those affiliations. So how did that kind of inform your early career, and then talk a bit about your Rise of the Rest / the Case Foundation and how all of those things built up to you arriving at VilCap?
Yeah, happy to do that. I'll try to keep it brief. I should also note, I don't think this is actually in my bio, but I grew up in Tucson, and I was laughing at the comment about Thunderbird and ASU because I grew up a massive fan of all things U of A, and my dad went to U of A, although my mom went to ASU. In-house rivalry, and so it was a little painful when Thunderbird was acquired by ASU, but I'm really happy with how they're managing that acquisition. So grew up in Tucson, but ended up actually at Thunderbird after spending about the first decade of my career in corporate communications, working with a combination of venture-backed companies as well as publicly traded tech companies in both a communications capacity, marketing capacity, investor relations capacity, and sort of had this self-reckoning, realizing that I wanted to take the skills that I was building in marketing and communication, but really wanted my career to have more impact. And so at the time, I thought corporate social responsibility was sort of where I wanted to head. And I knew Thunderbird had a really, and in international business particularly, and I knew Thunderbird had a really strong reputation for both supporting sort of both of those avenues. So I actually worked full time, went to grad school, and had this opportunity to make a shift as I was finishing up at Thunderbird when my boss, I was at AOL at the time, and this was not a particularly great time in AOL's history, and I was fortunate enough to have a boss who was invested in my career and not just my working at AOL, said, look, there's this really incredible opportunity that I came across at a family foundation, and I think you should pursue it. And I'm happy to make an introduction to the person who runs the foundation. And this is the family foundation of Gene Case, who was an early executive at AOL, and Steve Case, who was a co-founder of AOL. So I made the transition over to work for them, and spent 7 years, and I always attributed that to being like the real pivot point in my career, and happened to be fortunate enough to go work for them at a time when they were also at a real pivot point in what they had built, using what they had built at AOL to build a completely new paradigm for supporting entrepreneurs, for building out the field of impact investing, and for building out a sort of basis for creating a more equitable venture capital ecosystem. So I had the chance to work across multiple projects, both at the foundation and then as Steve was starting to build out his venture firm Revolution, that were really focused on the intersection of social change, impact investing in companies that were generating market rate returns, but also generating significant social impact, and then sort of more traditional venture capital. And in that process, sort of had my own discovery around what I was most passionate about. So one of the big initiatives that we created at the foundation was called Startup America, and that was in a private sector effort that was in partnership with a cross-agency federal government sector effort to ignite entrepreneurship throughout the United States. Sort of post 2008, there was a recognition that one of the big ways to restart the economy was to support entrepreneurs, something you all know, but wasn't necessarily obvious to a lot of people. There was a lot of focus on the corporate sector and tax cuts and big business, but the Kauffman Foundation had come out with a study that most of the net new jobs had been created by companies that were less than 5 years old. So had the opportunity to travel with Steve throughout the country, to visit entrepreneurial ecosystems and to really try to support the development of entrepreneurial ecosystems in places that hadn't gotten a lot of attention. We see a lot of attention go to Silicon Valley, to New York City, to Boston, but not a lot of these other places. So that led to another initiative we created at Revolution to say, like, how do we actually take this energy and enthusiasm and put some money behind it, and put some national media attention behind it? How do we use sort of the platform of Steve Case to build out a system that is funneling more capital to entrepreneurs that are not in those three places I just mentioned? So we decided to take a cue from AOL's success, and one of the early marketing campaigns that AOL undertook was to take a bus around the country and get people to get on the bus and sit in front of a computer and sign up for AOL. So we decided to take a bus to four cities to start with: Detroit, Nashville, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati. And we rode a bus for 4 days and visited entrepreneurs, held pitch competitions, and Steve wrote checks to entrepreneurs in each of the cities. We brought along national reporters with us, had a print reporter and a broadcast reporter to say, like, okay, media, it's time for you to actually showcase that there are great entrepreneurs in other places. And that kicked off what is now, I think they have two roughly $200 million funds that are investing in companies in these ecosystems. They've done, I want to say 6 bus tours. They've done 2 virtual tours now in the pandemic. So it's a very active effort to put money into entrepreneurs that are not in the traditional hotbeds of venture capital. So I'm landing the plane here. But what that led to for me was a realization that as I was going to these different cities, one of the things we were talking a lot about was the revitalization of parts of the city that had typically been sort of abandoned or overlooked or underinvested in. And I was noticing when we did the pitch competitions that a lot of the entrepreneurs came in, great ideas, really exciting innovations, but most of them did not look like the communities that they were located in or the communities that we were talking about transforming. And that really got under my skin. And I think we did a better job over time, certainly, and Rise of the Rest has done a great job of investing in diverse entrepreneurs. But that led me to some soul searching to say sort of how do I want to spend my time? And I happened to, while I was doing that soul searching, connect with the co-founder of Village Capital, and learned more about the mission of Village Capital, which is very much aligned with what we were doing with Rise of the Rest, but on a global scale, to support impact-driven entrepreneurs who had historically been sitting in blind spots for the early stage investment ecosystem, whether it is because of the problem they're trying to solve, whether it is because of the geography they're sitting in, or whether it is because of both implicit and explicit bias that leads to capital flowing really largely to white men. So that was something I was super excited about, and led to me joining first as COO in 2016. So I'm hitting just about 5 years, and then moved into the CEO role 2 years ago. So I will stop there.
That is one amazing journey, and in fact includes a literal journey on a bus. And,
exactly.
And I gotta say, you guys really nailed it. I mean, when you talk about cities that are just hitting on all cylinders, you named ones that would be on my list that are just perfect examples of what's going on, and where Pittsburgh, for example, is amazing. What they've been able to do, and how I think the confluence, healthcare, Carnegie Mellon. I mean, you just have all the right things in one place, which I will say, I think Tucson does too. I genuinely believe that. We didn't get the bus to visit; they came to Phoenix, but maybe we'll get them to come visit us in the next year.
I was not there to influence that decision. Otherwise, I think I would have pushed pretty hard.
Yeah. Who do we got to talk to? We'll see what we can do. Yeah, it was actually Ross Baird, the founder of VilCap, who had introduced me to you. That was how we met. Was I'd been talking with him, and he said, "Well, I don't know why you're talking to me. You need to be talking to Allie." And the rest, as they say, is history. So let's talk about kind of when you joined VilCap, where they were, what they were doing, as opposed to during and after a pandemic. What that has led to in terms of your own pivots, and how you see that fitting the VilCap mission.
Yeah, to give a little history, starting with the origin of the Village Capital name, we are called Village Capital as a sort of combination of the venture capital space and the village banking model in microfinance, which basically puts groups of people together in a community and asks them to help make decisions on who would receive a loan, a microloan in that community. And the concept for Village Capital started with the question of what would happen if you put a group of entrepreneurs together who are trying to solve problems in a particular community or sector, and ask them to actually make a decision on who would receive a venture capital investment, instead of relying on investors, some of whom may be generalists and not necessarily have the expertise in a particular sector, or as I mentioned before, we all have blind spots. So how could you leverage the power of the community to potentially make different types of investment decisions? And so that was the genesis of Village Capital 10 years ago, was to essentially pilot this model of peer-selected investment. And what it required, I often jokingly say that Village Capital became an accelerator by accident, because it required us to also train entrepreneurs on how to become investment ready so that they could assess investment readiness. And so the sort of process that we've been following and refining and honing for the last 10 years was really based on that original idea of creating an environment where entrepreneurs are making decisions and you're flipping the power dynamic on its head. And so the bulk of our work for the first 5-ish years of Village Capital's existence had been really running these programs and setting up first 2 different pilot pools of capital, and then a formal venture fund alongside of it to make investments in the companies that were participating in all of our programs. And through that, we've supported about 1,100, I think we're at 1,200 entrepreneurs through the direct support that we do, and made 110 investments through the existing venture capital fund, as well as some of the previous pools of capital using that process. So that's still a big chunk of the work that we do, and we're continuing to improve, refine the process, and now we're getting on the verge of launching another fund, and I can share a little bit more about that later. But one of the things we recognize in the process, and we work both in the United States, again, in sort of the rise of the rest geographies, as well as in sub-Saharan Africa, in India, and Latin America. So in geographies that have vastly different ecosystems from each other, and have lots of different types of challenges. And so we became very quickly involved in supporting, plugging a lot of ecosystem gaps, and also had a lot of inbound interest from folks who had seen our model at work and said, what does it look like to have a village capital program in my city or in my country? How could we make that work? And so we started to pilot some ideas to say, instead of trying to replicate village capital in a bunch of different places, how can we leverage these great ecosystem builders that are already creating networks, already thinking about programming for entrepreneurs, and provide them with the tools that the tools and the curriculum and the lessons that we've learned, also to help make sure that we are sharing mistakes that we've made so that others don't make them. And so we created VilCap Communities, which is an effort to support other ecosystem builders like Arizona Forge, and provide a toolkit really for other entrepreneur support organizations to successfully support the same types of entrepreneurs that we hope to support. That's sort of one piece of it. And then we started to build technology on top of it with our Abaca tool. The viral framework that we use as sort of the center of our investment readiness process was something that we recognized created sort of a light bulb moment between entrepreneurs and investors as they realized they were finally kind of speaking the same language about a company's investment readiness. And we thought, what would that look like if we were able to put that assessment process online and create sort of a top of the funnel screening tool to better match entrepreneurs and investors? And so that's really how we're looking at scaling our work, is not only do we continue to directly support entrepreneurs, but how can we impact vastly more entrepreneurs through these sort of different networks and ecosystems instead of trying to do dozens more programs by ourselves. Yeah.
Nice.
Oh, and I was going to touch on COVID. You also wanted me to mention the pandemic and how that's impacted our work. So just very briefly, I'm sure everyone has had the sort of had last year the, oh crap, we need to change things pretty significantly moment. And we were lucky that when COVID hit, we were sort of in a planning stage, and that allowed us to really do the work of taking apart our curriculum and putting it back together for a virtual environment, so that we were not relying on forcing people to be on Zoom for 8 hours a day for 5 days in a row. We knew that was not palatable. So we've been able to, I mean, look, I think it's still a work in progress, but I think we've been able to create a structure that is more palatable for virtual audiences, and that will inform how we do our programming when we can go back to being in person. I don't think it will look exactly the same as it did pre-pandemic.
Yeah, the keyword is hybrid, I think, these days.
Yeah.
You know, it's thinking about what parts do you have to do in person because there's just no substitute for it, and what parts can you move online or asynchronous or what have you. So you have a whole bunch of new initiatives, and I do want this to actually end up not just being me talking to you, but letting other folks. So what if we talk about Resource? Because I'm really interested in hearing more about Resource and what that is.
So Resource is a program that we launched very recently in partnership with the Black Innovation Alliance. The Black Innovation Alliance launched last year as a response to a lot of the attention and enthusiasm around moving capital to innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders of color and a recognition that there are lots of awesome BIPOC leaders on the ground who are building Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and building these organizations in the various cities and communities where they live. And so the Black Innovation Alliance is starting to build out sort of a set of programming and curriculum. And we were thinking about how do we leverage the VILCAP community's approach to support some of these organizations. So we decided to partner together to build out a program. The first iteration of the program involves a handful of entrepreneur support organizations. They are approaching entrepreneur support from lots of different angles. So some of them are virtual accelerator, well, many of them are virtual right now, but virtual accelerator programs, many are community-based, in-person programs, some have co-working spaces, but all are relatively small with sort of startup capital budgets, who are trying to think about how they grow their capability to support entrepreneurs, and particularly entrepreneurs of color. So we're running a program where we're essentially creating a peer learning environment, just like we do for our entrepreneurs that we support, and also create an assessment tool, kind of like a version of Viral for entrepreneur support organizations, so they can better understand the milestones that they need to aspire to in order to grow. So that is and the resource program not only was a way for us to continue to make sure that we're supporting communities that have historically been overlooked by the early stage investment ecosystem, but sort of building off of the work that we've been doing with VILCAP communities, as well as work that we've been doing on changing the dynamic in terms of who controls capital, as well as who capital goes to. And that's work that we've been doing with UBS and some other funders for quite some time.
I just put the link in case, I think it was very wise to move away from viral.
Prescient, I guess.
Yes, that was definitely prescient. But Abaca is something that we have had numerous conversations within our ecosystem around investment readiness level, because you have TRL that, on the technology readiness, and several others out there. And it's really interesting because I think there are just such differing viewpoints on what is investor readiness, and frankly, and you all see it this way, what if investment isn't at all where I want to go with what I'm doing? But I still need to go through a similar set of steps to get there.
Yeah.
I think let's tee it off here, especially with what you're doing with resource, and talk a bit about diversity, equity, inclusion. But I'm interested. So we've done surveys, we've done some kind of canvassing, looking around the community and the ecosystem, and a constant conversation is this a founder issue? Is it an investor issue? Because the theory goes that if we have successful founders, they become investors, and that goes on. But if we try to wait for that to happen organically, it's going to be another how many decades, right? So, how do you see that? And what's your, I guess, given thinking about our audience here, how do we help to make some of those changes or encourage that change?
Yeah, I actually just said the same thing about having to wait generations, and we don't have the time to wait generations the other day. So definitely on the same page as you. I think the challenge sits at multiple levels. It starts with one of the things that we're noodling on how to better address is at the earliest stages, at the friends and family stage. When you look at the data clearly shows that Black and Latinx populations in particular do not have the same wealth that white households do by a wide margin. And of course, that's, looking at average data. So the reality is that it often, you don't always have to have a lot of money to start a company, but it often takes some money and the ability to have the freedom from taking time off of your job and going without, health insurance to get a company off the ground. So people tend to rely on friends and family. And if you have a rich uncle or you have a network of people who are well connected, awesome. But I think we have a whole bunch of people who could be entrepreneurs who have great ideas who don't have that friends and family capital. So that's, and I say capital, meaning both financial capital as well as social capital, which ultimately leads to financial capital, the connections to the right people who can say, that's a really interesting idea. I have the capability to provide you with some startup capital and whatever form, loan, angel investment, et cetera. So friends and family, that's one stage. The other stage, I think, is at the investor level. Again, we're humans. We tend to support things that we're comfortable with. We tend to be more comfortable with people who look like us. Pattern recognition is a great thing when you have lots and lots and lots and lots of data, but pattern recognition can also be a shortcut to really sort of bringing in a lot of, again, implicit, often unintended bias. And so when you have a large majority of capital that is going to entrepreneurs that is controlled by people who look the same, of the same gender, you're probably going to have most of the capital go to people who look the same gender. So how do we create more opportunities for non-white males to be in decision-making roles and investment much faster? And I think there's a pace to that. And then the third is at the asset management level. So for people who are investing in funds, I often say, I also get asked about the gender issue a lot. And I've often said that if LPs insisted that funds hired more women in decision-making roles specifically, and if they insisted that their portfolios were more gender diverse, and the same goes for racial and ethnic diversity, I think you'd see money move a lot faster. But LPs are not, requiring that. It's not a conversation that happens as often as you would think, given how publicly we're having this conversation. So I think kind of change has to move at all levels, but it helps when it comes from the top, honestly.
Well said. I think you're very aware that we are coming to the end of the W21 cohort of our Advanced Entrepreneur Program, where we have a cohort of startups that all have at least one female founder. And I'm going to put one of them on the spot, but she did already agree, so it's okay. I'm not, in case Anna explodes. I'd ask Colleen if she wouldn't mind doing a quick pitch on her venture, because this is, I think, a really key part of how you get out and you reach other people and you get that support, like you're talking about, Allie. You got to be comfortable telling your story in all kinds of situations. I used to tease some of the founders I knew who, like, not only did they never meet a stranger, but, they'd get on an elevator, shake someone's hand and start telling them about their company. Yeah, and like, well, it sometimes works, and you meet the most interesting people that way, and sometimes they can be really big supporters. So Colleen, go for it.
Oh, thanks, Brian. And thanks, Allie. This is exciting to hear about Village Capital. So I'm Colin Kelly, and I'm the founder of Radian LLC. And we produce chemistry comic books for grades 9 through 12. And through the course of the Forge curriculum, I've sent out my MVP and am finding just these adorable 9-year-olds who are crushing college chemistry in 2 weeks. I've got case studies on it, and I'm blown away by how eager they are to learn through an age-appropriate platform.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Colleen. Who is also a faculty member at the U of A, right, Colleen? Yeah. So we have this, I mean, I think that's, like I said, the U of A is such an amazing, or not U of A, Tucson has such a great confluence of all of these different resources. And it's one of the things I think really is a success factor. So for those of you who are hanging out, as Anna had mentioned, if you have any questions, post them in the chat. I will throw your question out there, Andrew, and put you on notice if we need to drill in to unmute. Andrew asked if you ever encounter later stage investors who don't maybe share your point of view, your ethos in investing subsequent rounds. And if so, are you able to exert influence to persuade them, your portfolio companies, to not accept capital from those groups?
The short answer, and I'll elaborate too, is yes, and sometimes. It's a great question. In terms of later stage investors who don't share our ethos, particularly as companies start to really hit that growth trajectory, we do, and we rely on sort of the mission orientation of the entrepreneurs that we support, and that their core business is really rested on achieving a mission that has some sort of social impact, whether it's in sort of the sustainability of people, the planet, or creating economic opportunity for people who don't have it. And some people just say like, hey, this is an awesome investment, and we're willing to invest in your growth. In that case, even if people aren't mission aligned, if we have enough conversations with the co-investor to understand their real belief in the business and not pushing an entrepreneur to pivot, we wouldn't necessarily persuade a company not to accept capital. But there are definitely cases where we either know of just general predatory behavior by a particular investor, or a pushing away from the sort of core mission that that we don't have the confidence that the company would stay the course. We remind entrepreneurs, it feels like, and we talk a lot about power dynamics and investing, it feels like, okay, this individual wants to put money into my company, so I really should take it because I really need the money. But that entrepreneurs are as much in control of who invests in their company as the investors are. And there is a way to find the right people to associate with your business usually. So yeah, we haven't always been successful, but we do try to make sure that we're supporting our entrepreneurs, including aligning them with the right follow-on investors.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
We really good chat last month. My guest is a CEO of basically like a computational chemistry company. They came through Y Combinator. They've taken funding from Khosla and all, big VC. But one of the things that we talk about is the fact that as a founder, you do have a lot of say over who you take your money from, particularly in the early going, and frankly prioritize who over how much, because that advice, the doors they open, are so much more important than the check they're writing at the beginning. But yeah, so totally echoing a lot of what you're saying, Allie. Yeah. First time caller, no, I'm kidding. Anna wants to know what can early stage accelerators like Forge do at the front lines to foster greater DEI?
I mean, the lowest hanging fruit is just talking about it. I think acknowledging that there is a need to be more to do more work to support entrepreneurs who, again, have been sort of traditionally overlooked, and talking to other peers in the space about it too, and asking them what they're doing. Asking people what they're doing innocently often puts pressure on them to make sure they're doing more. And then, of course, being really intentional, like you all have been, about recruiting diverse entrepreneurs, continuing to build your pipeline, finding new networks of people who might be sitting in communities that you personally may not be in. That's certainly one thing. The other thing is around structuring the program, and we've continued to do this evaluation ourselves to say, are there any aspects of the programming or the way that we're recruiting or the way that we talk? This is also related to like recruiting team members, right? Like the job descriptions that we all collectively put out in the world sometimes do not consider DE&I, for example. So is the application process a barrier for anybody? How are we thinking about English as a second language? How are we creating a welcoming environment for people to apply? Those are all things that are important to consider and to talk to others about and find out what other people are doing to get best practices and just be in the spirit of constantly learning. I think you all are doing that, so.
Before I do like the question, but I want to also, to your comments, Allie, I won't put her on the spot because I don't know if she's just listening in, trying to do other stuff, but Lacey, who's joined us, is part of the Alumni Association for the university. And she and I have had, oh, there she is. Hey, Lacey. She and I, how are you today?
Oh, I'm great, Allie. It's been so wonderful listening to you, and I've just been eavesdropping, but yes, happy to be here.
Excellent.
So Lacey runs the Bear Down Network and all of the U of A alums. And how many are there?
So in terms of University of Arizona alumni that are on the Bear Down Network, we have just over 9,000. And of those, well, we have 9,000 on the platform. Of those 9,000, about 70% of them are alumni. So, and several of them actually live here in Tucson. So it's a really great community. We started it about 2 years ago. And so it's a platform built for connection. So Wildcats, students, faculty, staff, Wildcat parents, Wildcat friends can connect and communicate in this online environment. And it's really growing. So we're excited to partner with Forge and to get more of these opportunities out there.
Awesome.
Because from my point of view, we've got a built-in DE&I strategy. You know, when you think about the alums of the university and how large a group it is, and how I think we just need to tap into that for that expertise that they all have. Lacey's talked with me about people approaching and saying, how do I get involved? I want to mentor, I want to advise. And I think that's another answer to the question about what else we can do at the front lines to foster that greater D&I. Thanks, Lacey. I appreciate you put you on the spot. So, James, that's a great question. I definitely have some thoughts, but would hear yours. You know, how much? This is the famous kimono question, right? How much do I share in order to get the interest without necessarily giving away the key secrets? So, how do you advise folks around this topic, Allie?
It's a great question. I'll be very curious to hear your thoughts as well. And it's certainly there's no easy answer. And a lot of it is very dependent on the sector and the type of business you're building. So with 800 caveats, I would say try to be as transparent as you're comfortable with, because that is the way to compel, sort of convincing an investor that you have something that's truly unique, special, and defensible. People like to talk about the moat. So I do think it's important to try to be as transparent as you are comfortable with. Okay, so I'm seeing the chat. Particularly if it's a market that an investor would consider to be potentially crowded, being able to really demonstrate what your IP is and why it's unique is going to be important. But again, that's sort of it is very, as a general answer, it really depends a lot on what space you're playing in, what stage you are. But I tend to be an advocate for the side of transparency.
So there are kind of, number one, not only the it depends, but also where are you in the fundraising? So if you are at the very beginning, it's very different from I have lots of investment and I'm down that path, right? So let's assume, I assume, James, your question is relatively early stage investments. And so these are folks who you're hoping aren't just your check in, but they are advisors too, that they're going to maybe even join your board. And at which point they're hearing everything. They'll know everything about who you are. So, I mean, do you like lay it out pre-patent? No, but you need to be able to tell a compelling story about the problem that you solve and how you're solving it is innovative. So to the extent you can share that much, I think you need to be able to do that. And then truly, like I said, when they are either willing to put out a term sheet or to join on a round, then that entire conversation is changing entirely. I know we have Chuck on, he's been in front of the Desert Angels, and Andrew is in venture capital. They do, might B and C rounds, Andrew, or D as well?
A and B mostly, some opportunistic C, but mostly A, B.
And on A's, you need to know a lot to put a check in, right?
Yes. So we spend an extensive amount of time on diligence and understanding the company, the management team, the markets, and where we see value. So very time intensive.
So, I mean, the answer is that you have to give enough information for them to make an informed decision about investing, and you don't want them to not invest in you because you wouldn't share that, critical component. So I hope that helps, James. And you're part of our family. You can always come back and schedule time to chat more. We got lots of that. And we have a plug for the Bear Down Network. Thanks, Lacey. Absolutely. Those of you, if you're not in it, get in it. I signed up as soon as Lacey told me to. Any other questions? I mean, we have a really great range. We have students, we have folks who are in our AEP, we have a couple folks who've been through it and they're now part of our resident program. So, broad spectrum. We have Paul from our Tech Launch Arizona group. This is our commercialization arm of the university. What else is burning in your minds? I should call it AAA, Ask Anyone Anything. Do you have a question? Who is that guy, Paul Valdez, in the top corner? That might be on your mind. I don't know, who's that guy? Paul is our newest Forge. He'll be leading the Forge at U program, which is focused on student and campus and activities. So you'll see a lot more from him in the not too distant future, as soon as he relocates to Tucson from Toledo. All right, well, yes, yeah, the provisional patent side of things, definitely. I mean, it gets you in the pipe, right? It gets you recorded and on record. And we have no shortage of expertise in town and available to folks. We have the clinic at the Rogers Law School for those of you who are not employees of the university. So you can go to the IP clinic that Gavin runs and get time in with a second or third year law student on advice on intellectual property and how to get through the process. Anna would like to know more about equity crowdfunding trends, opportunities, and risks. Do you see much in your arena these days, Allie?
Yeah, I'm not as close to it as I used to be, but I can maybe give a little history and high level some of the exciting things I'm seeing in equity crowdfunding. So it is a great way to think about raising money for a business. I think particularly this is maybe a little aside from Village Capital, but particularly if for businesses that are being built in spaces that are like the cannabis sector that are like a little scary for investors, but sort of people want to dabble in these types of businesses. But I can give a little history on equity-based crowdfunding because I worked with Steve Case on advocating for something called the Jobs Act, which was passed in, oh goodness, when was that?
2017.
Before 2016. I'm gonna say no. It was before January of 2017. I'm sure of that. I think
You're
2015,
right, it was.
2016. It essentially allowed for, previously crowdfunding had been project-based, the things that many of you are really familiar with and like backing cool innovations, but you basically like, there was that like super souped up cooler, for example, I forget what it was called, but like for your crowdfunding, you got a cooler, you got a t-shirt or that sort of thing. Equity-based crowdfunding allowed people to put equity stakes into companies and ultimately make money back from the success of those companies. It took several years for the SEC to kind of figure out exactly what it would look like and the sort of regulatory environment that they wanted to put in place. But the last couple of years, equity crowdfunding has really taken off with the advent of platforms like Republic and WeFunder, who have simplified the process for founders, because one of the scary pieces about equity crowdfunding is your cap table starts to get super, super, super complicated with that many investors on the cap table. So that was a barrier that people like WeFunder and Republic have solved for. So you're seeing a lot more companies start to get out there and raise money on crowdfunding platforms. The other interesting thing that I'm seeing that I think could be transformative for the other piece of the equation I was talking about earlier in terms of who controls capital is there are now funds that are raising money on crowdfunding platforms as well. There's a firm called Backstage Capital, which invests exclusively in women and Black founders. And they just very quickly raised like $2 million to deploy to founders on Republic. For example, there's another firm, Earnest Capital, that I think is running a crowdfunding campaign on WeFunder right now. So those are some exciting things that are happening too. So yeah, I think that's probably the extent of my expertise on crowdfunding.
Yeah, I put a link here too. We put out a white paper toward the end of last year that covered equity crowdfunding. We had Johnny from WeFunder contribute. We had we got input on things like friends and family, the valuation side, equity, and all of those pieces. So those of you who are exploring or thinking about those routes, the white paper, we tried to talk a bit about what do you need to do to get yourself positioned, and then what are some of the options. And it's important to remember too that I loved your comment, Allie, about friends and family. Yeah, if only we all had that rich uncle or aunt, right? Then it'd be really easy, but most people don't. And I will add to it, how much do I really want my family involved in my company, and having a significant stake of it? I love them dearly, but I'd really like to just enjoy Thanksgiving without, it being a shareholder meeting. So anyway, do check out the white paper. James asked, what's been your biggest challenge as CEO? What do you think is key to your success in that position?
Oh, gosh, we only have 7 minutes left. Biggest challenge, I mean, I think first of all, just the unique role of being in running an organization that is first and foremost, a mission-driven organization to support entrepreneurs. And we happen to have an investment fund. And so like wrapping my head around the nuances of being theoretically in the nonprofit sector, but also in the investment sector, and learning a lot about hybrid structures and different types of governance for different types of things that we're doing, certainly. And then I guess if I could cheat and add a second, is leading a team through a global pandemic certainly would be very, very high on the list. And then key to success, honestly, mental health therapy, other peer CEOs of other organizations, and finding communities to be able to talk about the big challenges. I think we do not talk enough about how hard it is to be a leader of an organization, whether you're a startup founder or leading an entrepreneur support organization, being able to have spaces where you can have really candid conversations. And I'm a pretty candid and transparent person, but have the really candid and transparent conversations about challenges and trade ideas, and just vent at times. I think that has helped a lot.
For the folks who are CEOs or CEOs to be, how about, in 2 minutes or less, your view on mentors and building a mentoring circle?
Yeah, I talk a lot about this concept that Gene Case actually introduced to me, which is build your own personal board of directors. So I have a board of directors that I report to for Village Capital, and many of those are folks I inherited, but many are folks I know and that I've brought onto the board. But I also have a group of people that I rely on for different aspects of my life, both professionally and personally, that I make sure that I stay in touch with. Gene Case is one of them, but that I'm staying in touch with on a regular basis, and that we have a sort of mutual agreement that they are supportive of me and my growth in life and in work. And so I've been fortunate to build that out, and I try to also then pay it forward to support other, and particularly other up and coming women in their careers and their lives. So super important, hard to make time for sometimes, but really important.
It's immensely difficult to make time for, and ironically, the better you are at what you do, the harder it is to find the time to help, but all the more important it is. And so, Allie, I'd like to thank you for finding an hour in your day to come and meet with us and let us throw questions at you of all shapes and sizes. And really want to just put out a round of applause. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you. This was fun. I really appreciate it. Great questions, and always, hopefully I can come back to Tucson and get together with y'all in person soon.
Our door, no, I'm pointing the wrong way. Our door is always open to you, Allie.
Excellent.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.